What happens when Hollywood's most outspoken action star sits down with late-night television's king of controversy, only to discover that the interview was designed as an ambush from the very beginning? Tonight, we're breaking down the explosive confrontation between Alan Ritchson and Jimmy Kimmel that left audiences stunned and industry insiders questioning everything they thought they knew about late-night television. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below telling us what you think really happened behind the scenes, because what unfolded on that stage was unlike anything we've ever seen before. The tension was palpable from the moment Alan Ritchson walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage. Fresh off the massive success of Reacher, the towering actor had every reason to expect a standard promotional interview. The audience erupted in applause as he made his way to the guest chair, his imposing 6'2" frame commanding attention even in the bright studio lights. Kimmel, wearing his trademark smirk, stood up for the customary handshake, but there was something different in his demeanor that night, something that suggested this wasn't going to be the typical Hollywood love fest that audiences had come to expect. "Alan Ritchson, everybody," Kimmel announced as the applause died down, his voice carrying an undertone that seasoned television watchers might have recognized as trouble brewing. "The man who's made quite a name for himself recently, haven't you, Alan?" Ritchson settled into the guest chair, his natural charisma evident as he flashed that megawatt smile that had won over millions of fans worldwide. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy. It's great to be here." But Kimmel wasn't interested in pleasantries. Instead of diving into the usual questions about upcoming projects or behind-the-scenes stories, he leaned back in his chair with a calculated pause that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "You know, Alan, I've been thinking about something you said in a recent interview," Kimmel began, his tone deceptively casual. "You mentioned that Hollywood has a problem with authenticity, that too many people in this business are, and I quote, fake and manufactured. That's interesting coming from someone who's built their entire career playing other people." The smile on Ritchson's face faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure with the professionalism of someone who'd navigated countless interviews before. "Well, Jimmy, I think there's a difference between being an actor, which is my profession, and being genuine about who you are as a person when you're not performing." "Is there, though?" Kimmel pressed, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "I mean, you're sitting here right now, on my show, promoting your work, selling yourself to my audience. How do we know this version of Alan Ritchson is any more real than Jack Reacher?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and anyone watching could sense that this was no longer a typical late-night interview. The audience, initially excited to see their favorite action star, began to murmur among themselves, clearly picking up on the hostile undertones emanating from the host's chair. Ritchson straightened in his seat, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Jimmy, I'm not sure what you're getting at here, but I came on your show tonight to talk about my work and connect with fans, not to defend my character to someone who doesn't know me personally." "Oh, but that's just it," Kimmel said, leaning forward with the predatory instincts of someone who sensed blood in the water. "I do know you, Alan. At least I know what people in this town say about you. The word is that success has gone to your head, that you've forgotten where you came from. Some might even say you've become everything you claim to despise about Hollywood." The accusation hit like a slap across the face, and for the first time since sitting down, Ritchson's carefully maintained media-trained facade began to crack. His eyes narrowed as he processed what had just happened, the realization dawning that he'd walked into a carefully orchestrated character assassination. "That's a pretty serious accusation to make on national television without any evidence to back it up," Ritchson replied, his voice remaining steady but carrying a warning that anyone with half a brain would have heeded. "Are you speaking from personal experience, or are you just repeating gossip?" But Kimmel was just getting started. With the ruthless efficiency of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of public humiliation, he reached for a stack of cards on his desk, making a show of shuffling through them, as if selecting ammunition for his next attack. "Well, since you mention evidence," Kimmel said with mock thoughtfulness, "let's talk about your recent comments regarding the entertainment industry's treatment of military veterans. You seem pretty passionate about that topic. Almost angry, some might say. Tell me, Alan, is that anger genuine? Or is it just another performance designed to appeal to a specific demographic?" The question was loaded with implications, each word carefully chosen to maximum damage. It wasn't just questioning Ritchson's opinions, it was questioning his integrity, his authenticity, and his right to speak on issues that clearly mattered deeply to him. Ritchson's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles whitening as he fought to maintain control. "My commitment to supporting veterans isn't a performance, Jimmy. It's personal and it's real. The fact that you would suggest otherwise says a lot more about you than it does about me." "Does it?" Kimmel shot back, his voice dripping with false innocence. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've found a very convenient cause that happens to align perfectly with your tough guy image. Very marketable, very strategic." The word strategic hit like a dagger, and anyone watching could see that Kimmel had crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. This wasn't comedy, this wasn't entertainment. This was a deliberate attempt to destroy someone's reputation in front of millions of viewers. Ritchson sat forward in his chair, his imposing frame suddenly seeming even larger as his patience finally began to wear thin. "Jimmy, I don't know what your problem is with me, but this isn't an interview anymore. This is an ambush, and I'm not going to sit here and let you attack my character based on industry gossip and your own twisted assumptions." The studio had gone dead quiet, the audience sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Even the cameramen seemed frozen in place, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut to commercial. But Kimmel, emboldened by the reaction he was getting, pressed on with the reckless abandon of someone who believed himself untouchable. "Attack your character?" Kimmel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Alan, I'm just asking questions that your fans deserve answers to. Isn't that what journalism is about? Holding public figures accountable?" "Journalism?" Ritchson repeated, his voice rising for the first time since the interview began. "Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a man with his own insecurities taking cheap shots at someone he's never bothered to get to know. You want to talk about authentic, Jimmy? Let's talk about the authentic you, the one behind all the manufactured late-night persona." The tables had suddenly turned, and Kimmel's confident smirk began to waver as he realized that his carefully planned ambush was backfiring spectacularly. Ritchson wasn't backing down, he wasn't crumbling under the pressure, and he certainly wasn't going to play the victim that Kimmel had expected him to be. "Now hold on a minute," Kimmel stammered, his voice losing some of its earlier venom as he suddenly found himself on the defensive. "I think you're overreacting here." "Overreacting?" Ritchson stood up from his chair, his full height making him tower over the seated host. "Jimmy, you've spent the last 10 minutes questioning my integrity, my motivations, and my character, all based on secondhand gossip and your own assumptions. And now you want to tell me I'm overreacting?" The confrontation had reached a boiling point, and everyone in the studio could feel the electricity in the air. This was no longer television entertainment. This was a real conflict between two men, playing out in front of a live audience and millions of viewers at home. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what would soon become one of the most talked-about interviews in late-night television history. The studio audience watched in stunned silence as the confrontation reached a fever pitch, but Kimmel, perhaps realizing he had pushed too far, attempted to regain control of the situation with a forced laugh that fooled absolutely no one in the room. Alan, please sit down," Kimmel said, gesturing toward the chair with the kind of patronizing tone that only made things worse. "You're making this way more dramatic than it needs to be. I'm just doing my job here, asking the hard questions that other interviewers are afraid to ask." Ritchson remained standing, his eyes locked on Kimmel with an intensity that made several audience members visibly uncomfortable. "Your job? Jimmy, your job is supposed to be entertainment, not character assassination. There's a difference between asking hard questions and launching personal attacks based on rumors and gossip." "Personal attacks?" Kimmel's voice took on a defensive edge as he realized his attempt to paint himself as the reasonable one wasn't working. "I haven't attacked anyone. I've simply pointed out some inconsistencies in your public persona that people have noticed. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be in this business." The condescending dismissal was the final straw, and Ritchson's composure finally cracked completely. "Inconsistencies in my persona? Jimmy, the only inconsistency I see here is between the Jimmy Kimmel who pretends to care about social issues and the real Jimmy Kimmel who thinks it's acceptable to ambush guests for ratings." "Now wait just a minute," Kimmel interrupted, his own temper beginning to flare as he realized he was losing control of his own show. You don't get to come on my stage and lecture me about my career or my character. I've been doing this for over 20 years. 20 years of what exactly? Ritchson fired back, his voice carrying across the now silent studio with devastating clarity. 20 years of hiding behind a desk and taking cheap shots at people who are actually out there doing something meaningful with their lives? 20 years of pretending to be the voice of reason while contributing nothing but cynicism and negativity to the world? The accusation hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated, and Kimmel's face flushed red as he struggled to formulate a response. The man who made his living embarrassing others was suddenly finding himself on the receiving end of public humiliation, and he clearly didn't know how to handle it. "You know what, Alan?" Kimmel said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "I think your fans deserve to know the real reason you're so defensive tonight. I think they deserve to know about the stories I've heard from people who've worked with you, about how difficult you can be, about the tantrums and the ego." "Stories from who exactly?" Ritchson demanded, leaning forward slightly, his imposing presence making Kimmel shrink back in his chair. "Name one person. Give me one specific example, instead of hiding behind vague accusations and anonymous sources. If you're going to destroy someone's reputation on national television, at least have the courage to back up your claims with facts." Kimmel's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, clearly caught off guard by the direct challenge. It was becoming increasingly obvious that his attack had been built on nothing more than industry gossip and his own assumptions, and now he was being called to account for it in front of millions of viewers. "I protect my sources," Kimmel finally managed, but his voice lacked conviction, and everyone in the room could hear it. "That's basic journalism." "Journalism again?" Ritchson laughed, but there was no humor in it, only contempt. "Jimmy, you're not a journalist. You're a comedian who's forgotten how to be funny. Real journalists verify their sources, they check their facts, they don't just repeat gossip because it fits their narrative." The insult hit home, and Kimmel's carefully constructed television persona finally crumbled completely. "You arrogant piece of work," he snarled, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that the microphone still picked up clearly. "You think because you play some tough guy on television that makes you better than everyone else? You think your little action hero roles make you some kind of authority on anything that matters?" The mask had finally come off, and the real Jimmy Kimmel was now on full display for everyone to see. Gone was the jovial late-night host, replaced by a bitter, petty man who couldn't handle being challenged on his own show. "There it is," Ritchson said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The real Jimmy Kimmel. Not the carefully crafted television persona, not the fake concern for social issues, just a man who can't stand the fact that someone called him out on his behavior. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me." Kimmel shot back, standing up from behind his desk for the first time since the interview began. "You don't know anything about me or what I've accomplished in this industry." "What you've accomplished?" Ritchson's voice rose again, his patience completely exhausted. "Jimmy, what have you actually accomplished besides making a career out of mocking people and stirring up controversy for ratings? When was the last time you used your platform to actually help someone instead of tearing them down?" The question struck at the heart of everything that was wrong with the entire situation, and Kimmel had no answer for it. His mouth worked soundlessly for several seconds as he searched for a comeback that would salvage what was left of his dignity. "I've raised millions for charity," he finally said, but even he seemed to know how weak it sounded in the context of what had just transpired. "Congratulations," Ritchson replied with withering sarcasm. "You've raised money while simultaneously poisoning the well of public discourse. You've created a culture where it's acceptable to destroy people's reputations for entertainment value. Real heroic stuff, Jimmy." The studio audience, which had been silent throughout most of the confrontation, began to stir uncomfortably. Some were clearly on Ritchson's side, nodding in agreement with his points, while others seemed shocked by the complete breakdown of what was supposed to be a light-hearted late-night interview. Kimmel, sensing that he was losing the room entirely, made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "You know what, Alan? I think we're done here. Maybe you should leave if you can't handle a real conversation about your career and your character." "A real conversation?" Ritchson's voice was incredulous. "Jimmy, this wasn't a conversation, this was an ambush, and we both know it. You had no intention of having a real discussion about anything. You came into this interview with a predetermined narrative, And when it didn't go the way you planned, you resorted to personal attacks and character assassination. "I'm the host of this show," Kimmel said, his voice taking on a desperate edge as he tried to reassert his authority. "I decide how the interviews go, and I decide when they're over." "You're absolutely right," Ritchson said, his voice suddenly calm again, which somehow made his words even more devastating. "You are the host of this show, and tonight you've shown everyone exactly what kind of host you really are. You've shown them that you're willing to destroy someone's reputation for ratings, that you hide behind anonymous sources and industry gossip instead of dealing in facts, and that when someone calls you out on your behavior, you resort to name-calling like a child having a tantrum." The brutal assessment left Kimmel speechless, his face cycling through various shades of red as he struggled to come up with any kind of response that wouldn't make him look even worse than he already did. "I think your audience deserves better than this," Ritchson continued, his voice carrying clearly through the now dead silent studio. "They deserve a host who treats guests with respect, who asks real questions instead of launching personal attacks, and who takes responsibility for his own actions instead of hiding behind his desk and his security guards." As if summoned by the mention of security, several large men in dark suits began moving toward the stage area, clearly responding to some signal from the production team. But Ritchson wasn't intimidated. If anything, their presence seemed to vindicate everything he had just said about Kimmel's character. "And there we have it," Ritchson said, gesturing toward the approaching security guards. "When Jimmy Kimmel can't win an argument with words, he calls in the muscle. Real classy, Jimmy. Really shows the kind of man you are when the cameras are rolling and the whole world is watching." The security guards continued their approach, but Ritchson stood his ground, his eyes never leaving Kimmel's face as the host desperately tried to salvage what remained of his authority and dignity. "You can call security all you want, Jimmy," Ritchson said with deadly calm, "but that doesn't change what everyone in this room just witnessed. You ambushed a guest, made baseless accusations, and when you got called out for it, you couldn't handle the heat." Kimmel, his face now a deep shade of crimson, jabbed his finger toward Ritchson like a weapon. "Get him out of here. This interview is over." "Oh, I'm leaving," Ritchson replied, straightening to his full height and looking down at Kimmel with unmistakable contempt. "But not because you're throwing me out. I'm leaving because I have too much respect for myself to sit here and be part of whatever this pathetic display was supposed to be." The audience watched in stunned fascination as Ritchson began walking toward the edge of the stage, but he wasn't finished. He turned back one final time, his voice carrying across the silent studio with crystal clarity. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy? You had a platform that could have been used for something meaningful. You could have had real conversations, asked real questions, maybe even made a positive difference in people's lives. Instead, you chose to turn it into a circus where you're the ringleader, and your guests are the animals you get to poke and prod for entertainment." Kimmel's mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came out. The man who made his living with quick comebacks and cutting remarks had been completely disarmed by someone who refused to play his games. "And the saddest part," Ritchson continued, his words hitting like hammers, "is that you probably think you won something tonight. You probably think this was good television, good for ratings, good for your career. But what you actually did was show everyone watching exactly who you really are when the mask comes off." The security guards had finally reached the stage area, but they seemed uncertain about what to do. Ritchson wasn't being violent or threatening, he was simply speaking his mind, and forcibly removing him would only make Kimmel look even worse than he already did. "I don't need security to escort me out," Ritchson said, addressing the guards directly with professional courtesy that made Kimmel's earlier behavior look even more petty by comparison. "I can find my own way." He turned toward Kimmel one last time, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute finality. "Jimmy, I came here tonight to promote my work and connect with fans. What I found instead was a man so insecure in his own achievements that he has to tear down others to feel better about himself. That's not entertainment, that's not journalism, that's just sad." Without another word, Ritchson walked off the stage, leaving behind a stunned audience and a host who looked like he'd just been hit by a freight train. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of Kimmel's humiliation as he stood there speechless, his carefully constructed television persona lying in ruins around him. The studio remained silent for what felt like an eternity, the only sound being Ritchson's footsteps as he disappeared into the wings. Finally, Kimmel managed to find his voice, but all he could manage was a weak attempt at damage control. "Well, folks, that was unexpected," he said, his voice shaking slightly as he tried to smile for the cameras. "I guess some people just can't handle honest questions about their careers." But the deflection fell flat, and everyone watching knew it. The damage had been done, and no amount of spin could change what had just happened. Kimmel had been exposed as exactly what Ritchson had accused him of being, a man who hid behind his desk and his platform to take cheap shots at people better than himself. As the show cut to commercial, the audience sat in stunned silence, many of them pulling out their phones to capture their reactions to what they had just witnessed. They had come expecting typical late-night entertainment, and instead had seen one of the most brutal takedowns in television history. The confrontation between Alan Ritchson and Jimmy Kimmel would become the stuff of legend, a perfect example of what happens when someone finally stands up to a bully and refuses to back down. Ritchson had walked into what was supposed to be a trap and instead had turned the tables completely, exposing Kimmel's true character for all the world to see. In less than 30 minutes, everything had changed. Kimmel's reputation as the king of late-night television had been shattered, while Ritchson had shown that real strength doesn't come from hiding behind a desk and taking cheap shots. It comes from standing up for what's right, even when the whole world is watching. The aftermath would be swift and brutal for Kimmel, but that night, in that moment, justice had been served in the most public way possible. Sometimes it takes a real hero to show the world what a fake one looks like, and Alan Ritchson had done exactly that. What did you think of this incredible confrontation? Did Ritchson go too far, or was Kimmel completely out of line from the beginning? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more breakdowns of Hollywood's most shocking moments. The entertainment industry will never be the same after what happened on that stage, and we'll be here to break down every explosive detail as the story continues to unfold.